Hello, everybody. My name is Alison Meyer, and I am here with my beautiful friend and colleague, Denise.
Hello, everyone.
So, Denise and I have decided to bring a series of conversations to you about natural health. Like I said, my name is Alison. I'm a naturopath, a herbalist, a children's herbal author, an energy worker, and during our work, I guess. There are lots and lots of beautiful and complex and just intricate things that happen in everybody's lives that occur time and time again, and that Denise and I thought we should start some discussions on. So then people have a resource to go to, or just, a resource to go to kind of check in and see if they're on track or if they potentially might need some additional support themselves.
Awesome. Thanks, Alison. So, as Alison said, my name is Denise Melton. I'm a naturopath and medical herbalist. I'm also a medical astrologer and have a huge interest in evolutionary astrology as well. Um, I'm seeing a lot of people in clinic who are being, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but they're being gaslit, I suppose is the word, isn't it? And told that what's happening to them is normal or there's nothing wrong with them. And so, yes, we thought we put together some information for you guys so that there was more of a resource to go to realize that you're not going mad, that something is definitely going on. And yeah, we're here to support you. So yeah, let us know your questions if there's things that you want to know as well while we go as we go on.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Denise. We're in such a crucial time in healthcare and just in life in general, really, on this planet. But we are at this crucial tipping point of the healthcare landscape where a lot of people's concerns either aren't being heeded to, aren't being acknowledged or listened to. And I think that the health conditions that we're faced with today are moving along and progressing faster than what the medical sciences can catch up with. And therefore, the mainstream medical practitioners, who are mostly the primary port of call for a lot of people, are behind the eight ball before they even begin. And so, coming from our naturopathic point of view, we harness obviously the scientific side that we've been able to anchor our teachings from, but there's a lot of traditional basis to what we do, and it's a holistic view, one that has developed over centuries, since time immemorial of humanity, that those core systematic practices continue to support us and bring us back to a model of healthcare where you don't necessarily need a label or a diagnosis. You can listen into your patient and you can hear what systems in their body are needing support, and you can support them from that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's even more than just like you said, it's a marrying of both points of view. It's a new paradigm of healthcare. It's bringing the science with the traditional and moving forward that way.
And there's a real beauty to the days that we live in because we do have the scientific model and structure to back up what has been done for eons. So we are very fortunate that we've got the scientific body of research and we've got the traditional body of wisdom
Mm.
to collate together to be able to build upon what we're able to offer to our patients. And then, of course, like you said, you do astrology, something I didn't mention, but something I do, which is I'm an energetic practitioner as well. We harness and build into all of our treatment plans that mind, body, spirit connection, because we're not just a physical body. We're not just a collection of physical symptoms. We are also a collection of our emotional and psychological experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I love one of the people that I follow who always talks about the physical being the caboose on the train. So basically, once it's manifesting in the physical, it's already gone through the mind and it's gone through the emotions, and so it's finally being showing up. So absolutely, we need to address all three systems and the spiritual aspects.
That's a great analogy. And you know, again, we've now got beautiful scientists and beautiful people working in the metaphysical field, like Dr. Joe Dispenza, who are also verifying through scientific measurements, through functional MRIs, through his meditation retreats, that mind body connection. And he's being able to prove things like certain transcendental meditations and the effect it has on your body's ability to create, generate, and fluctuate, if you like, the proteins within your body.
Yeah, his work is incredible. Yeah, I think if we were able to harness the exact real stuff that he's talking about, if every one of us could do that, we wouldn't really need a medical system.
And you know, that gives me so much excitement for where we're headed as a species. And I know that
Yeah,
there's a lot of
absolutely.
doom and gloom on the planet at the moment, but I really think that we're at that cusp of really tapping into our human potential and our inner technology. Everyone's talking about the AI technology. Well, we have our own inner technology. It's either been forgotten or intentionally miseducated from us. And I think we're, as a species, on that cusp of bridging the next level of healthcare, but also our own inner power.
Absolutely.
So it's all very exciting.
It is. So those are yeah, those are the sort of things we want to bring to you in our podcast, to talking about all these different aspects that play a role. And no matter where you're at, you can jump in and find a path, find a piece of the network, if you like.
Absolutely. And one of the other things that Denise and I want to do is well, I'll speak maybe for myself and you chime in if this is what you want to do too, Denise. But I want to kind of push the envelope a little bit and sit on that fringe that make people think about what's possible. Because what is possible is endless. And when we push the boundaries of what we have currently been living in, we are able to dream into this world a greater sense of well being, a greater sense of thriving rather than just surviving, which is what I see the last centuries on this planet have been. And I would love to see the next centuries on this planet for us to move from a picture of surviving to thriving.
Absolutely, Alison. And I think that's exactly the way you put it was brilliant. Just, bringing people a different perspective, just showing them, not necessarily saying that it's right. It's just possible. Like maybe have a look at this from this point of view, from this hilltop or from that hilltop, rather than staying within your box, and see if it's for you.
That's right. Yes. And when you're on the cusp of change, it's scary because there's often a lot of unknowns. But you know the the risk of staying still and being stagnant, you're never going to know if it's worked or not. So whilst these discussions aren't direct medical advice, they are just that. They're discussions. They're ways of imagining and visioning and dreaming new ways of being into this beautiful world and into your life, because everybody has untapped potential. And if we are limited by a condition or a trauma or some sort of a symptom, and we can't move past that, then that limits obviously what our future potential and growth is. So hopefully, some of these discussions can plant a seed within our listeners or our viewers that allows them to branch into a new version of themselves.
Lovely.
Mm. And I know, Denise, that you are an absolute star with female hormonal conditions. So I think, given your beautiful expertise and all the wisdom that you can offer here, if we can potentially bridge this conversation into that transitional portal of something like menopause.
Absolutely. And I really want to say that it's a real shame that perimenopause and menopause is the first time women will start to take note of their hormones, or if they, I'll caveat that by saying they might have earlier if they'd had trouble conceiving, or if they had issue with endometriosis or something, it might have been on their radar. Before, a lot of women, they get to perimenopause and suddenly they realize that they have hormones and they blame their hormones for what's happening to them at this stage in their life. Whereas if they had been tapped in to their hormonal cycle for their whole adult life, they actually would have dealt with the little mini things that come up. It's a beautiful thing, the menstrual cycle, because it is a little mini detox, a little mini purge every single month. You get an opportunity to get through stuff in your life that needs to be removed, detoxified, let go of. And if you can recognize that early on, by the time you get to perimenopause, when your hormonal cycle is running out and your body's like, well, now we've got to purge all this crap. Like we've got to get rid of it all before we stop cycling. And now you're going, oh my God, I'm bleeding heavy. I'm emotional. I'm depressed. I want to kill my husband. I'm not interested in sex. My kids are driving me mad. I just want to leave and go somewhere quiet. Right? Because your body is craving, that purging. And it is oh gosh, I mean, it's a huge thing to talk about in terms of females or the feminine, the suppression, the expectation of women. Everything is on the woman's shoulders from early on in terms of how they have to show up, who they have to be, and the expectation of society. And that's why when we get to this perimenopause, menopausal time, we have a terrible time because we just haven't been honoring ourselves. We haven't been taking care of ourselves. And then we blame the hormones
Mm.
when really it's a beautiful opportunity to it's actually the final opportunity, which is very interesting to me. Having gone through it myself, coming out the other side, is that, now it's done. I can't go back to those years and try and remove that stuff without having to set aside specific time, whether it's following the lunar cycle or whatever, to try and affect those tidal waves within the body, you know? Anyway, I feel like I've gone in a little bit of a tangent with what I've been saying, but just, for me, the menstrual cycle came to me in terms of what it is, how I work with it, sort of in my early 40s, maybe actually probably late 30s. And I'm very, very grateful of the amount of time I had to actually work through every cycle. I used to have such a ritual around every cycle. I worked for myself, so I was able to take time at every cycle. And it made my perimenopausal, menopausal time at the moment is actually beautiful.
Beautiful.
Um, so
Beautiful.
yeah,
There's so many things that you've touched on there that I want to expand on further. And the first, which is right at the beginning of what you were saying, is about how the expectations are put on women. And I want to throw a different curveball on that and talk about the how hormones are pathologized and they shouldn't be pathologized. This is a natural state for girls, women, Crohn's to go through. And that perimenopause, menopausal state is really called that second spring. And the first spring, of course, is that introduction into our fertile years from a girl into puberty, into those fertile years. And then that second spring, as you say, when you get to purge even more and go through that other layer of yourself, is that perimenopausal menopausal window. And so you mentioned that you had some beautiful rituals and things that you were able to put into place. And I wonder if you can share some of those that might be, of benefit to our listeners.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's just understanding that each cycle has its own spring, summer, autumn, winter. So every cycle has that seasonal rhythm to it. It's like, just like the moon does. It's a very big cycle like the moon. So for most women, they would have their summertime or their ovulation time around the full moon. When there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of light, there's a lot of support from the sun, the estrogen is peaking. There's a, you feel vivacious. Estrogen is a very flirty hormone. I always liken her to Betty Boo, and I'm showing my age then. But she's like a little bit curvaceous. She makes us a little bit curvaceous. She gives us that beautiful plumpness to the skin, which is why we don't have wrinkles. We have that soft skin. This is all estrogen. And so in that first part of the cycle, there's estrogen. You feel great. And so, allowing yourself to take advantage of her gifts during those first 2 weeks, well, especially the second week of your cycle. And then once you've ovulated, then you're going into a more autumn time. This is a time where we go inwards, we start reflecting, we start looking at conserving energy. We actually have a time where we have energy, that we've got lots of energy, we've got lots to give. But the autumn phase of the cycle, the luteal phase of the cycle, we draw it in a little bit. We don't commit to so many things. We become a little bit more reflective. We become more like, the kid who wants to stay home and read or watch something, like rather than interact.
And just to really paint a clear picture for those that might not understand where this occurs in their cycle, day one is that first day of your bleed. So if you could talk them through how, because you just beautifully talked about the first phase and the second phase, can you put that into a calendar cyclic way? So then people that don't know what is a cycle and how to count it, they can put that into practice.
Yeah, sure. So the first day, like you said, is the day of your bleed. And for some women, they bleed for 7 days, and some women bleed for 4 days. And no matter how long you bleed, there's a lot you can tell about your health by the type of blood. If you start off spotty, if you get, migraines, if there's a whole lot we can talk about in terms of the menstrual cycle itself. But basically, that first week is your winter time when you're bleeding. And then you're going to go into spring as your estrogen starts to rise. So you've stopped bleeding now. You're going to have that sort of, for some girls, it will start on day 5, 6. For some, it will start on day 8, 9. It just depends, but your estrogen is starting to rise up, and that's your springtime. And you'll start to feel your energy come back. You'll be creative. You'll have ideas. As you get into your highest estrogen peak of the whole cycle, it will actually tell the brain to excrete luteinizing hormone, which is the hormone that causes you to ovulate. So then you'll ovulate. That'll just be that hormone only comes up for 1 day. Ovulation happens and estrogen actually drops. And for a lot of women, they can feel a little bit tired or low or, just not so great on that day because all of a sudden estrogen's been taken away. And estrogen has a very strong relationship with serotonin. And so, when estrogen drops too, or you don't have enough estrogen, feel anxious or depressive, or just have a low mood. So, following that with your cycle is interesting as well. And then, like I said, once you've ovulated, you're entering your luteal phase,
And
which is
that's kind
when
of around that day 14 mark, typically textbook wise.
typically textbook, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of women, like, some women will be day 17, some women will be day 12. It
Yep.
doesn't follow any rhythm. But the thing is, as long as it's normal for you,
Yes.
right? And the same with levels of hormones, like we have this range of hormonal levels and we say this is where you've got to fall within. But the same thing, you can always be a slightly low estrogen progesterone person. Doesn't mean that you have any trouble with fertility or anything else. The biggest factor is the luteal phase, which is the second phase of your cycle. Once you've ovulated, we want it to be at least 12 to 14 days for fertility. If it's a little bit less than that, you may have trouble. Like, again, not everyone, and it's one of those things which is completely a miracle of life. And so, if you are having trouble, that's what they want. They want you to have at least 12 to 14 days of progesterone during that luteal phase. And that is also when GABA will rise. So that's in your inhibitory neurotransmitter. You will feel more relaxed, less likely to socialize. You'll be better at listening, interestingly enough. And so if someone's going through trouble in terms of how to support that progesterone, it's actually that tend and befriend rather for women during that time is a really good time because you're a good listener. Whereas estrogen is a little bit look at me, which is the first, that second week of the cycle. Whereas progesterone can be a little bit more inclusive sit down and listen, that friend who will just be there for you. Um, and then, yeah, like I say, if that during that time, what starts to happen that sort of few days before you bleed, and this coincides with the moon, right? As soon as we have the new moon, would be the first day of your bleeding. But before the new moon, you have the dark moon. And this is a time where you actually can find out what in your life is not working. There's no light. Doesn't mean it's a negative thing. It just means that you're able to see more of the light because there's more dark, there's more contrast to see what's actually not in the light in your life. And so for me, this was a great time for me to actually go within and go, all right, why am I feeling unhappy? So if I had PMS, for instance, and to use a silly example, my husband's not picking up his clothes off the floor, right? And the whole month I don't care, but the day before my cycle, it's annoying as hell, right? Then I've got to realize, okay, it's not about the clothes on the floor. It's way deeper than that. Where am I not feeling supported? Where am I not getting my needs met? And the easiest way for me is to attack him. But if I take that inward and go and reflect and journal or whatever it is that's your process, whether it's walking or whatever, figure out what it is that's actually underlying that and what can you do about it. And this is the beauty of the new moon, is because then you can plant seeds for what's not working. So you figure out what's not working on the dark moon, and then you can, as you start to bleed, you can start to plant those seeds for the next cycle. And then again, you reap what you sow. And so if every cycle of your whole life you have been in deficit because you haven't been addressing your energy, you haven't been addressing your emotional needs, and every cycle you compensate and you compensate and you compensate. By the time you get to perimenopause, you just can't compensate anymore because there's no hormonal support, right?
That's right. That's right. And there's a couple of things again I want to point on there that you've just so beautifully illustrated is first and foremost how amazing and fascinating and miraculous is the feminine, because we get a whole year in a month. We get all the seasons in a month if we're tuned in, tapped in, turned on. Now, talking about pathologizing our cycles, so many girls, and I'm talking girls, not women, girls start on the oral contraceptive pill and it hides the seasons from the beginning. It hides the proper release of the estrogen and the progesterone because it's controlled by synthetic hormones. There's so many layers to that then, as you say, come through when we get to that menopausal phase, when our adrenals really need to step in and shine, but they're exhausted before they even get to step in for their big show, because as women, as the feminine, we are expected, particularly in your and my generation, and goodness knows the ones before us, to be seen and not heard, to be in service, to, look after the husbands, to be the mothers, and these days, thanks to the feminist movement, and that was sarcasm, we are the career woman as well. And so not only are we giving all the time to all of our family members, all of our society, our work, there's very often little left over for us, particularly if we have been taking a synthetic hormone on top that suppresses that natural cycle even more. So then when you do get to that perimenopausal window, those symptoms, because I'm just going to say a little caveat here, history shows us that women didn't go through such dramatic menopausal transition as what they do today. And there's so many compounding factors to that, those that we've just spoken about, but those synthetic hormones that we use to suppress, and that's all it's doing, it's suppressing your natural state. By the time we get to that next transitional window, our body is dysregulated more than it ever should have been, and it's then has a huge hurdle to overcome to get through that next spring, to get through that next transition, to re-regulate and find its new norm. And so again, once we're on that ride, it tends to cascade, and then they transition you then from the oral contraceptive pill to HRT, again, all synthetic hormones that are only suppressing what your body's innate wisdom is meant to be doing.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you get ladies who are in their 70s, 80s getting hot flushes and being depressed and etc. because they've just never had a chance to go through this. And I want to tell you, ladies, if you haven't done the work, you are going to go through this. There is no way to not,
And you,
unless you,
yes,
yeah, I was
and I
going to
can't
say it.
tell you how many 70-year-old women I speak with who should be well past this now, but because they were offered HRT and they suppressed all of their natural hormonal responses, and then HRT has a time frame that is safe, quote unquote, to which is in and of itself a dicey comment, um, where they know that they can give it to you with not as high a risk for cancer and cardiovascular and bone diseases and all these other things. So they take you off after that period of time. But the fact that you were on those hormones for that period of time increases your risk for those things anyway. But coming back to when you are taken off them, you have just delayed what was going to happen maybe in your 40s and 50s. Now you're 70. Now you don't have the get up and go that you would have had as a 40 and 50-year-old woman to make this transition. Now you've got to do it when you're 70. And it's very hard because you've generally, in today's over medicated society, have a lot of comorbidities when you're 70. So it's very difficult to juggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what you said a bit earlier about pathologizing this time, we've pathologized the whole menstrual cycle. I mean, from the get-go, girls get sore cycles initially, or they have acne, oral contraceptive pill. It's like it's a pathology from the get-go rather than the most amazing cycle that women have. Men don't have this, you know, they don't have the ability to, like, we have the ability to take and transmute
Hmm.
and transform, right? Every single month, we can do that. We have the ability to create, whether it's to create life or to use the menstrual cycle to create something new. Like I was saying, the rituals about the menstrual cycle is to actually tune in to your creative abilities. The feminine is extremely creative. And if I was a conspiracy theorist, I might say this is what they wanted to actually stop. They wanted us to not have that ability.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening to women now in perimenopause is everybody's talking about all their symptoms. They're not talking about the power of the actual transition, which is really, really sad for me because it is such a powerful transition. And, I was actually looking just the other day, someone was talking about there's three species on the planet that have a menopause, and it's elephants, whales, and humans, right? Only those three. And why? It's to educate the younger generation in those two, like in the elephants and the whales. That's what their job is to educate the younger generation.
And that's beautiful segue into that transition into becoming the crone, the wise
Yes.
woman, the sage, because it is that. It's your ability to step into a role of elderhood, and to be able to step in but step back in that similar way, to be able to hold space for those younger generations and to teach, to train, to support. Yeah, it's a beautiful window, and looking at it from that spiritual window, like you also alluded to, if you haven't done the work in the younger years of sitting cyclically with yourself, with your emotions, which are often very suppressed generationally because of societal values, because of expectations, not to mention just the psyche of the patriarchy on the feminine, that when we get to that menopausal window, there's so much more to unpack that isn't just physical. And so I'm just remembering a woman that I saw at our local cafe this morning. There was this gorgeous older couple that came in. They had their walking poles with them. Um, and the lady wanted to leave her walking poles in the corner next to our table. And her husband wouldn't have a bar of it. And he's like, oh no, we can't leave the poles here. And I was trying to say, it's okay. I don't need the poles. Like, I can look after them for you. And he referenced how they'd been on a trip and he'd already lost one set of walking poles and he was terrified of his wife if he lost another set. And I, of course, giggled. And then she came out and she said, well, I've just found my voice, haven't I? And he doesn't like it. And you're nodding because you know how often that we hear this in clinic where the woman says, I found my voice. And the husband isn't used to a subservient or serving woman, wife, mother, having an opinion, having a voice. And then they get to this transitional age where the women go, you know what? I've done everything in my community, in my family that I've needed to do. The clock is ticking and I haven't lived who I am yet, and it is time to honor who I am. And then they step up. If they take the invitation, they step up and they say, I'm going to express my opinion. I'm going to express my voice. I am going to express me, who I came here to be. And this in the olden days, and even still today, was called mania and hysteria because men can't cope with it. So they get pathologized and they get medicated. And when they're unhappy with their husbands, they get put on antidepressants. And yes, there is a component where people can get true depression. We can cover that in another discussion. But typically speaking, by their medical practitioners and by their husbands, they're seen as difficult, they're seen as, rebuttive, and they're seen as hysterical, quote unquote, and they get medicated for that. They get told that this is not normal. And I like to challenge that by saying, well, what is not normal is not listening and not allowing your wife, your mother, your grandmother, your sister to express her truth, to express her authenticity, why she came here. You came here for a reason. You came here to this earth to live for a certain purpose. Her only purpose is not to birth your children. Her purpose is multifaceted and she can do so many things. And she is finally in those years where she reclaims her power. And she says, baby, it's now or never. I have a voice and you will listen to it. And society needs to be able to find its backbone and its strength to not only listen to these women, but to support them in a loving way.
Absolutely. And I also would like to say that if you have done a lot of work, by the time you get to that point, your actual voice is not for you. Your voice is for the community because you
Yes.
start to see how to give back. And that's actually another reason why it's actually really sad that women don't do this before they get to perimenopause, because then they go, oh my God, this is my voice. And they get very feisty and aggressive about standing up for themselves, which is in itself, as you said, it's a beautiful thing, but it's actually really sad because as a menopausal crone, witch woman, our job is to actually save the community, not
Yes.
to save ourselves. We should have been living our life the whole time. It's actually now where we actually sacrifice for the community. That's our job. That's our role. That's who we are as a fierce feminine in the menopausal years, is to go, this isn't right, and stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. That is where the feminine needs to come from in their menopausal years.
Absolutely. And that is why in our culture, we have a huge lack of elders because it has been suppressed so terribly. But I think that we are in that era where we're bridging that gap. They are coming back in the ways that the youth are willing to listen to the elders, and that the elders are again stepping into that role of holding the identity, but also the compassion and the care and the wisdom that they need to give to their communities.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you've been allowed to be who you are, you don't need to then continue to prove that. I
No.
mean, that's the beautiful joy about aging is that you can then let go of your ego
Mm.
and actually be there as an elder, like you said. And it has been it's been a role that's been completely neglected, especially in the Western world. I mean, we have been obviously to speak about it from that perspective because that's where we live. But yeah, being able to have lived an authentic life and then to step into the authentic role of the elder and come from a real place of knowing, like a
Mm.
real truth. It's inspirational to young people because they do need some guidance. A lot of young people are lost.
Yeah, and across the board, I think every age group, depending on what sort of lived experience you've had, can either be in their power or they can be lost. So that speaks also to the spiritual growth and development, which anybody can take on at any point in their life, to harness the truth and the authenticity of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like as we're talking about this menopausal transition or the perimenopausal, I think for a lot of women, the perimenopausal is the worst because, you can bleed every 2 weeks and it can be heavy and then you can have headaches and then you don't have any cycle, but you're depressed. And, that's kind of seems to be the most turbulent time for women is they actually need to just say, I need some time for me because they actually cannot cope if they don't.
Yeah, so I think it's really great to touch on those symptoms, right? So those physical symptoms that can come up, and it's varied for everyone. It can be that you just are more irritable and less tolerant of things, so your stress index isn't as tolerant. It can be that your sleeping goes haywire and you're not getting enough sleep, or you're getting night sweats, or even just hot flushes through the day. It can be, like you said, the headaches, the migraines. It can be that variation in our bleeding cycles. So you can have more frequent periods or you can have less frequent periods. It just
Yeah.
depends on what your hormonal cycle is. And this is where, as naturopaths, we treat everybody individually rather than a one size fits all approach, because there is no one size fits all. Everybody
No.
has different circumstances as well as different biology, and that all needs to be supported. The other big one I see on clinic is emotional dysregulation. So that comes from our cortisol response, but it also comes from that rapid rise and drop of estrogen and progesterone, brain fog, and memory loss. People come in thinking that they're getting dementia and they're losing their minds. And often that's a dysregulation of hormones.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've got to remember that there's not, that's the thing in terms of the pathology, the pathologizing of it. There's not just two hormones, right? It's
No,
not just estrogen and progesterone, and sometimes testosterone is talked about. There's cortisol, there's insulin, both of them are hormones and they actually do have a role to play. And then, my most favorite hormone that not very many people talk about is oxytocin. And, it's very, very underutilized and it's a beautiful, beautiful hormone and helps to regulate your nervous system so beautifully, down regulate your cortisol, which then has that knock-on effect to your estrogen, your reproductive hormones. So we talk about improving estrogen or trying to modulate it or trying to help with detoxification, etc. But let's talk about those other ones, like oxytocin, for instance, or even just our catecholamines and down regulating those, rather than just focusing on one or two that are obviously a lot more downstream and are actually a result of, like you mentioned earlier, the adrenals not being able to cope and just our hectic lifestyles and actually not being able to take a minute to actually just get some love on ourselves, just like
absolutely.
getting our hugs on and chatting with a friend about some positive things rather than bitching all the time.
Yep. Nail on the head. Well done. That was fantastic. But there were so many hormones that you threw in there, which a lot of people may or may not be familiar with. And most people have heard of oxytocin because a lot of women have given birth. Not all, but a lot of women have given birth. And, there's a big focus on oxytocin when you go through that portal.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people have fallen in love, right? Um, its main focus is obviously for birthing, but it's a bonding hormone. It what makes humans want to form bonds with each other and be in community.
Yes.
But just actually physical touch will improve oxytocin. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you get your hugs from your husband. He might be the last person you want to speak to at the moment. That's between you and him. But a dog, for instance, getting pats and cuddles from an animal is a great way to raise your oxytocin.
And
Hugs from friends.
that's a beautiful suggestion because, as you say, you may not wish to get that from your husband at this point because of all of the surging that's going through as you're going through this transition. And women often come in and say they've got no libido. And
Mm,
another symptom is vaginal dryness. So even if the libido was there, it's uncomfortable. So it's very hard sometimes to find those bonds and to raise your oxytocin that way. But it's also important to remember because your doctor will only talk to you about estrogen and progesterone, and that's the only solution that they have for you with regards to their HRT, is they'll give you an estrogel or a tablet or something to regulate those two hormones. And whilst we can appreciate the absolute integral role that they have in this transition, they also feed into that intricate hormonal feedback loop, which ultimately then also speaks to our neurotransmitter production. We know that cortisol is linked up with that. We know that our adrenaline and our noradrenaline, our stress, our flight and fight response is really intricately tied into this. And just getting an estrogel from your doctor is not going to feed that. It's not going to support that. Your adrenal glands, which sit on the top of your kidneys, are integral to this process, and we need to be able to nourish those to get you through a change. A change in the body is a stress to the body, and we need to be able to accommodate that change to adapt, which is why in herbal medicine we have this beautiful class of medicines called adaptogens. They're there to help you adapt under stress.
mm.
And they're a big component of this. And when we're able to do that runs down that dopamine pathway, our adrenaline, noradrenaline response. And when we're able to then go further upstream and nurture the gut, then we're able to also affect our serotonin production and our GABA. And that GABA is, like you were saying earlier, that beautiful neurotransmitter that comes in to calm us down and to help take some of the pressure off those other neurotransmitter pathways.
Yeah, lovely. Absolutely. And, I wanted to just talk about cortisol with women as well. Like, we have to be very mindful. I don't know how many women will come in and they're living on coffee or some kind of caffeine, whether it's tea or green tea. Um, whilst, there isn't that's a stimulant and it is a natural stimulant, right? It's a plant. But stimulants to the adrenals are the last thing you need
Yep,
because of the fact that those adrenals are having to take over creating most of your hormone now. And, constantly squeezing them dry is kind of how I look at coffee when you know, for a lot of women, if you're stressed to the max and you're having coffee, you're squeezing your cortisol levels really, really high,
yep,
or over a long time, they just get really, really low. And this is going to affect your insulin response, which, as most women who come in, the main reason they come in with perimenopausal stuff is I've got this weight gain and I just can't get rid of it. And
yes.
this is tied to cortisol too, right? Cortisol raises blood sugar. What's going to do with the blood sugar? We need insulin to clear it. As we get lower in estrogen, we're going to have issue with insulin sensitivity. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes. Yep.
managing that stress response is the most important thing. And if it's something that you're used to doing, this is why I go back to, perimenopause and menopause doesn't start in perimenopause. It starts years before that. If you're not taking care of your menstrual cycle and your stress month to month, cycle to cycle, because we're not just making our hormones from our ovaries, we're always making some of our hormones from our adrenals.
And I'm just going to paint a real black and white picture here for people. So, ladies, if you're still in your fertile years and you're chasing that career and you're working 14 hours a day and you're drinking 5 cups of coffee, you're drawing on your adrenals. You're drawing on the reserves that you're going to need when you stop cycling and you get to menopause. And then that sets you up, in my opinion, for a more difficult transition. Unless you have super robust, absolutely amazing DNA and genes, which a lot of people don't these days because we live in a toxic soup. We really do. Our
Mm.
bodies are amazing, but we've got pesticides, we've got pollutants, we've got xenoestrogens in our plastics, and my gosh, there's all sorts of things that your hormones and your endocrine system are trying to adapt to and accommodate on top of your coffee usage, on top of the stress from the big demands at work and meeting those tight deadlines and pulling in the career, and being the mum and being the everything. So, ladies, this is just me being black and white and saying, whilst you're in your 30s and you go, 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 it's you need to reflect on this because it actually can have a very big effect on your life when you go through this beautiful but sometimes challenging portal.
Yeah, well said.
Mm, yeah. And you know, there's so many caveats to this conversation, isn't there? And you even
Yeah.
spoke about insulin resistance, which is a big one. Cholesterol is another really big one because all
Oh,
the
yeah.
studies are done on men with cholesterol. And so your cholesterol, women, as you go through this transition, is going to go up. And your doctors are going to go, oh, you've got high cholesterol. I need to put you on statins to bring your cholesterol down. And you need to have a frank conversation with your practitioner and say, well, why is my cholesterol raised? I'm going through this portal, right, where my estrogen is dropped and that food source to the brain is not as abundant. And so, what does cholesterol do? It steps in to do some of that. Cholesterol is also an indicator of inflammation. What happens when we get to that portal in our life? Some people have other comorbidities that are reflective of systemic inflammation, and cholesterol can be a messenger of that. So,
100%. I mean, that's absolutely true. Most people are inflamed, and especially in their guts, right? By the time they get to their 40s, their guts is shot from life. And, we always forget that estrogen is a beautiful anti inflammatory. That's one of the things it's a beautiful anti inflammatory. We don't even mention that half the time.
you're right.
So that's why you ladies are getting joint pain and you're getting high cholesterol because, yeah, estrogen is fluctuating. The body's trying to adapt, like you said. There is a lot going on physiologically, 100%. It is not just, that's why, I want to remind us that it starts early on. And again, going back to the physical is the caboose on the train. Take care of yourself. That's like the biggest takeaway. Eat right, exercise, move the body in healthy, restorative ways during your cycle. Do the purge during your cycle. Be mindful of the fact that you have this cyclic rhythm to your energy response. You know,
Yes. Yes, and I think tampons were actually one of the worst things invented because it means women still swim and they still do all this running and do all this sporting rather than going into the wintering of, I've got my bleed, I need to rest. Or the oral contraceptive pill, what do? They skip their period altogether, which we know isn't a proper period because it's a synthetically operated bleed. But and maybe we can should delve into that a little bit further as well. But women push through. They push through when they're energetic reserves are saying otherwise. And again, that's more the masculine that is productive in this world, and we need to settle back into the feminine. We need to relearn what the feminine is. And, for those that do transition through this beautiful portal into eldership, can pass some of their wisdom on to those younger women to remind them of that.
yeah, absolutely. And I also want to say, like just to bring it in for the masculine as well. I mean, men have also been driven to just neglect their feminine as well. So they're also, doing 24-hour days sometimes, or, you know, having too much coffee, not eating right, etc. And it affects them as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mm,
Yep. The whole societal construct.
yeah, 100%.
Mm.
100%. So yeah, ladies, emotionally, mentally taking back that responsibility. This is a responsibility that you have to yourself. And this is the time. Don't just go on HRT and forget the fact that you're having this transition. You know, actually take it by the horns and just say, this is happening to me. This is the last time my body is going to demand something of me in a good way,
Yes.
right? And so honor that ability of your body to transcend the physical, to have this beautiful transition through into a an aspect of the feminine which is powerful, fierce, and
And what?
allow that to be a part, yeah, and
Yeah.
wild, exactly, and allow that to be a part of our society
Mm.
rather than just dampening her down and keeping her quiet. We need that fierceness. I mean, look at the world. We need our grandmothers to stand up and say, enough. This is enough. Stop it now, you
Mm.
know, and speak for
Yes.
those who can't speak for themselves.
Yes. And there is a legacy here, right? There's a legacy of women who will need additional support through this portal. And so there is no, I just want to preface that Denise and I are really open minded and that there is no judgment, right? So,
Yeah.
whatever you choose to do to get you, because everybody's circumstances are so different, their living experience, their household experience, everything is so different that one woman's stress or demands on her physical and emotional body is going to be different to others. But that's where individualized natural medicine can really support you because it's tailored to you rather than a one size fits all that eventually will bring you exactly to where you are now anyway. Because the suppression of the symptoms through the pathologized, I can't say the word, over
Pathologizing. Yeah.
pathologizing of menopause and the over medication of menopause means that we're suppressing what will eventually catch up with us anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And absolutely. I mean, I have women. The thing is, what's upsetting is you get women coming in who've got prolapse and things like that, who, if they had just taken better care, and it doesn't mean that they have to do, you know, not work or not do what they love. But it's just find the right support for them. Just find what works for you. And, if the HRT is going to work for you because you're suicidal or you have murderous thoughts towards your husband, and it can help get you through while you then look at other avenues so that you don't have to be on it for long term. Absolutely. There, like you said, there's no judgment. But ideally, there's always going to be my ideal versus your ideal.
And at the end of the day, you and I in our profession are about education. And so
Yeah,
that's what these discussions are about. We're about bringing information to people that has been either just forgotten, suppressed, or just not talked about because it wasn't cool, wasn't the hot
yeah,
trend. So, what we are passionate about is giving information and education to people because potentially they don't even know that there's another option. Potentially they didn't even know that there is another solution other than what their doctors offer. And a lot of doctors don't know that there are other options out there as well. So, we can only do what we are armed with, what we are knowledgeable with, and we have to meet ourselves with compassion for that. So if you are somebody that listens to this message and you're postmenopausal and you think, I wish I had have known, don't beat yourself up because we are
Yeah.
all individual humans, and we are all here on an individual journey. And that's going to show up different for everyone. And the information that is right for us at that time will find us. And then when we've got the open heart and the open ears to hear it, we will hear it and we'll be able to receive it. We'll be able to acknowledge it. And then we'll be able to decide what is the right steps forward. And a lot of the women, of course, we've got a beautiful rainbow of life out there, a rainbow of different women who aren't medically minded, and you're not meant to be. That's why you go and see a practitioner, because they're the ones that do this all the time. So some of the hormones that we've spoken about today, you might be like, what? And you're like going off to Google things. And that's awesome, because that means that we've been able to plant a seed, we've been able to bring something to you that you didn't know before. And that is a big part of what natural health care is all about. It's about educating you, it's about bringing you back into synchronicity with the language of your body, with the language of your soul, and ultimately the language of nature, which is what you are.
Beautifully said.
So I think actually that might be a nice spot to wrap up today's chat. I hope everybody has enjoyed this beautiful conversation, which brings a different flair to healthcare.
Absolutely. And like, if you have any questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. Your questions help us address what is going on for you. So, we are very open to helping no matter what is going on. So please just let us know.
And thank you, Denise. It's an honor to sit here and chat with you. You are an amazing practitioner, a beautiful soul that listens to all of your patients, and I'm thrilled to be able to start this series with you.
Likewise, Alison.
All right. Much love to everybody listening. Bye for
Take
now.
care. Bye.